Yeah, I've been doing Agile for like 12 years now, and I'm very opinionated about it.
Cool.
Hey, one
Good.
second.
Well, I'll just listen to you and make snarky comments along the way.
This episode is sponsored by Component One, makers of Widgmo. If you need stunning UI elements or awesome graphs and charts, then go to widgmo.com and check them out. Hosting and bandwidth provided by the Blue Box Group. Check them out at bluebox.net. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 18 of the JavaScript Jabber Show. This week on our panel we have AJ O'Neill.
Coming to you live from space.
We also have Jameson Dance.
Provo, Utah, less exciting than space, but still exciting.
And Joe Eames.
Utah as well, somewhere in the desert of Utah.
Somewhere in the deserts of Utah. I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. You may notice that's a little bit different. I'm going to have that website up this week, and I'm going to start moving all the podcasts over to it, so then you can follow everything that's going on over there. The site is up. It's just not complete, so you can go and look at it and see how pretty it is, but that's about all you can get at this point. So anyway, let's go ahead and jump in, talk about Agile development. What is you guys' experience with Agile development? What methodologies have you used? And have you worked at many places that follow an Agile methodology or try to adopt Agile in some way?
So I'll go first because I probably have the least experience of it. I feel like ITV is kind of a post-Agile place. We've tried Agile stuff, and for lots of rapid prototyping without well-defined like specific features, it kind of struggled a little bit. So we did like points, and it was kind of a Kanban type thing where we had a board and we had the note cards and moved them around and stuff. But we are a lot less formal now. It wasn't a good fit for us, and I don't know if that was because we were doing it wrong or because of the way that we work and what we're working on. But it was probably several months of that, and then it kind of ended a little bit after I got here. Maybe I destroyed it. Oh wow, I never thought about that.
Agile wrecker, huh?
Yeah. I think I wasn't agile enough.
What about you, AJ?
I have pretty little experience too. Like here, we've done a lot of different things that I guess fit into the agile buzzword. Like we've done stand-up meetings, we've done Scrummy, the little post-it note website. We've done a bunch of different things, but it's just like the workflow changes from being something that's intensely urgent to then being stuff that doesn't have like a secure deadline. And I don't know, it's just been really hard to find a good workflow. So I'm interested to hear more about you and Joe's experience.
Okay, Joe?
Well, I think it was 2001 when my company we transferred to its practices to Scrum. And we went through a training process, and every company I've worked at since then has practiced some form of Agile, pretty much some variation of Scrum. Some of them more Kanban, less Kanban than others. So I've been doing Agile now for 12 years, and almost 12 years. And basic math skills escape me. I guess that would be 11 years. So, I've seen it a lot of different incarnations, big companies, small companies. And I tell, companies that I go to or interview with that Agile is a requirement for me, which kind of brings me back to something that Jameson was talking about over at ITV, where I'm somewhat familiar with what ITV, how they operate. And, I would say that they're doing Agile. They're just doing their own flavor of Agile. So
Interesting. So I've worked at a couple of places where we practiced various forms of Agile. I worked at one company where I was the team lead, and the process was pretty much, when I got there, it was the CEO wants this, go do it. And it moved pretty quickly from that into more of an Agile setup, and a lot of that was because I could push it that way. And then when I left there, I went to Public Engines, crimereports.com. And when I was working there, they were kind of in flux. Like they kept changing the methodology that they were using, and didn't really adopt a lot of Agile processes. But I was there, and a friend of mine, David Brady, was there, and so we started kind of leaning on things to try and get things into an Agile methodology. And in the process, we convinced our boss to not only let us go to Agile Roots, which is a local conference in Salt Lake City, and I'll put a link in the show notes. I think it's this weekend.
Yep.
And I've got a ton of stuff going on this weekend, so I'm not going to be able to make it, but I wish I could. Anyway, so we convinced our boss to let us go, and then he decided, well, heck, it's right up the street, because it literally was like half a mile away on the same road that our office was on. So we convinced my boss to go with us and to bring the entire team, and so we all spent 2 days there. And when we came back, he was totally on board, and so we started adopting a lot of the Agile stuff.
So real quick, why don't you just go ahead and give us a definition of what Agile means? Because as far as I've understood it, it basically means instead of planning things out completely for 3 years and then working on it for 5 to get it wrong, you work on it a week at a time, right?
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to tell you is go to agilemanifesto.org, and it talks about, this is the manifesto for Agile software development, and basically, here, I'll just read it. It's really short. It says, we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. And so I think if you're trying to boil it down to waterfall and not waterfall, I think you really miss a lot of the value that's in Agile development. For me, the big value in Agile development is that you get to focus on these things. And so I'll just go into this real briefly. I know Joe's going to have stuff to add, but I think the big thing is the first one, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. The Agile processes really open up communication about what you're working on and why you're doing it. And I think when you miss out on some of that, you really do yourself a disservice. You wind up rebuilding things over and over again because they're not done right. You're not communicating with the people who are building pieces that are adjacent to yours. And so you really start to, you lose a lot of value when you're focused on the process as opposed to focus on communication. You have anything to add there, Joe?
No, that's a great summation of that, I think.
So the other one is working software over comprehensive documentation. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You want to deliver stuff that works all the time, you know. So you don't commit unless it's working. You focus on delivering things that work and do what they're supposed to do. It just I don't know. I don't know what else to add to that.
So I don't know how many of you guys have worked in environments where documentation was paramount. I spent a short stint at a government contractor many years ago, and the reason it was a short stint was because of how they operated. And they told me, I actually wasn't there for this phase of it, but they started out with 6 months or a year of just documenting the requirements of the system. And so they ended up with, I can't remember how many thousands of pages of documentation about how the system that they were going to build was going to work. And it was an inventory system. And then when they were, 8 months, 10 months, 12 months into it, the customer's representative on their team was getting so tired of all this, they finally went to the branch. It was a branch of the government they were working for, and said, hey, we really need to start building the software. And so they finally said, okay. And they took all this documentation, they put it on a shelf, and nobody ever opened up the documentation again. And they actually at that point, started building the software that people wanted. Not that they did a great job at it, but they realized right from the get-go that all the documentation they had done was completely useless, and that they were trying to build software that somebody actually wanted to use and could use. And so, for people that have never been in that situation, especially in this day and age where we frequently don't see that like we did back in the 90s, and even more so 80s and earlier on, it's hard to comprehend what it was like when you would spend 6 months, 8 months, 12 months writing documentation. You'd spend more effort on documentation than on the software, at least it seemed like.
Yeah, and I've also seen it where, and this kind of leans more towards some of the methodologies than necessarily what it says in the manifesto. But I've seen teams basically get in and they have this development cycle where they build, and then they have a big release after like 6 months or a year. And if you tried to use any of the build systems in the interim, they wouldn't work. And, and so it's the same, instead of documentation at that point, I mean, they're just totally missing the picture of working software. The other thing is They do what Joe's talking about, and they have this upfront, this is what we're going to build, and so they don't look at what they're actually building for 6 months. They just crank it out, and at the end of 6 months they have released what they designed 6 months ago without ever getting any validation that that's actually what they needed to build. And
right.
so you wind up running halfway across the country, and you find out that you went the wrong way. It doesn't do you any good. And
yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize the contribution that Agile has made to the software environment in ways that we haven't noticed. That all the companies that aren't doing what they would consider to be Agile are still heavily influenced by the Agile movement. Companies, like I said, that do this 6 and 12 months of documentation before they build software, nobody's doing that anymore, because the industry as a whole has realized that was a bad thing. And that came about because of, the Agile movement, or at least it was not documenting it, that's a bad word. But they encoded that knowledge, right? And said, hey, documentation is really not that important. And that word spread, and now companies, they don't do that. But even if they're, like, as Jameson was talking about, we're not doing Agile methodology because we're not doing any recognized Agile method, still they haven't fallen back to the old bad habits that we had in the 80s and the 90s as an industry.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say a couple things. I came to software development in the post-Agile world. So I think a lot of things I just take for granted that are the way you do things. It's not Agile. It's like how you develop software. It doesn't have a name. It's just what you do. So I agree with Joe that lots of this is a product of Agile coming about. And it's kind of weird to me that it wasn't always this way. It just seems like the way you do stuff. But I also wanted to ask about the difference between Agile, the manifesto, and Agile, the product, because there are lots of people making lots of money off of the word Agile.
Right.
And there's all kinds. So I think it's funny that the manifesto says like people over process or whatever. Isn't that what it says? And then there are all these, you can go out and spend tons of money on Agile tools, I don't know. So how do you differentiate between things that are actually Agile and things that are like built around the buzzword of Agile?
I'll let Joe jump in on this first. I have huge opinions on this, but
well, it's certainly something that I've often joked about with coworkers about, we don't value, or we value the interactions over the tools, and that there's so many tools out there. But on the other hand, when you try to do, but if you try to do Agile, especially if they're in a remote team, those tools are very enabling, right? So whether you're using physical artifacts, whiteboards, Kanban boards, whatever, swim lanes, boards, sticky notes up on everywhere, plastered everywhere, or you're using something virtual, the tools are definitely an enabling piece. So I think they have a lot of value. I've used a lot of different tools for Agile of different kinds, and I've seen a lot of value out of them. But you definitely have to realize that it's not the tool that makes the process. It's not even the process that makes Agile what it is. It's not the tool that makes Agile what it is. It's what you guys do as a development team, not just as a development team, just developers, but as an entire product team. It's what you guys do and how you build your software. That's what makes Agile, not the tools you're using. There's this great quote in some video, and I wish I could find the link. I looked for a little while, where there's two people talking, and the one guy says to the other guy, "Do you do Agile?" He says, "Yes, we do Agile. We do the scrums," right?
Yeah, we have stand-up meetings, so we're Agile. So
right, exactly.
So my take is pretty much along the same lines. The way that I see it is that you have the Agile principles, which are kind of the core values that guide software development if you are going to follow an agile process, I guess. Then you have all of these tools and methodologies and people trying to sell you on all these different things. And ultimately, what you need to do is you need to find the tools that facilitate these things, that make it easier. So these aren't software tools. These aren't tools that let you build software. They're tools that help make it easier for individuals and interactions to do what they need to do. So they make the individual's job easier. They make the interactions occur. They make the interactions clearer. You have continuous integration that allows you to focus on working software. You have different project management tools that not only help you manage and define the interactions between the team members and the different pieces that they're working on, but allow the customers to come in and say, this is what I want, this is not what I want. So they're agile tools in the sense that they help make this job easier. They support these principles. And if they don't support the principles, then they're not the right kind of agile tools for you. And so, for example, there are some project management tools out there. I don't necessarily want to pick on them, but they are the big names in agile project management tools, and I can't stand them. And the reason is because they're so complicated that you wind up going back over to the right side of these things where it says the things on the left have more value than the things on the right, where you spend more time fiddling with your tool than you actually spend interacting with the members of your team and communicating through the tool.
That's why your team has to build the tool.
Yeah, now we're going to get into not invented here, right? So
that's another thing. The Agile Manifesto doesn't talk about the other Agile like quotes you hear, like not invented here, or you ain't gonna need it, or dry. Yeah. So there's a bunch of other stuff as well. It just seems like pragmatic,
that's because
not necessarily.
Ruby didn't exist yet.
I think a lot of these conversations took place before Ruby was around. I think the Ruby community adopted a lot of them, maybe a little more vocally within the community than some of the other communities out there. But I don't think these conversations are necessarily even unique to Rubyists. But ultimately, again, it comes back to dry. Again, you can feed it back in here. It doesn't add directly, to the conversation about working software. But ultimately, it is a principle that helps you get working software and maintain it, and so it's important. But, ultimately, you are trying to figure out how you can make these things occur. You're trying to figure out what you can put in place to help facilitate these interactions, what you can do to make sure your software is working, what you can do to get your customer more involved and have them collaborating with you, and then make sure that you're adapting to changes that you see. And so you'll see a lot of different methodologies that bring in these ideas that tell you, okay, so you should be having Scrum every morning. Why? Well, it's not so you can stand up and beat your chest and say, this is what I did. It's so you can stand up and if you have a problem, you can ask. If you want to let people know that they can move ahead and connect to something that you just built, then you do that. But it's about interaction. It's about the communication. If you're having retrospectives, you sit down and you say, okay, this is what we've been doing. These are some of the things that we tried out, which is built into just about every methodology I've seen, is where you actually sit down and talk about the methodology. You say, we're going to try this new thing for a week or 2 or 3 or 10 or whatever, however long you think it's going to take to really get it. And then you sit down and you start talking about it. Well, when we do pair programming, we've noticed that it works really well under these circumstances and not so well under these other circumstances. And then you adapt so that your process becomes better and better suited to what you're doing. And that's what Agile's about. So, ultimately, whether or not you're going to have, this is a long rant. So whether or not you're following an exact methodology, or whether you're, picking up pieces from extreme programming and pieces from Scrum and pieces from Kanban and pieces from somewhere else and something else that you read about on the web, ultimately you're looking for something that will allow you to do these things correctly so that you can build better software.
That's great way to sum that up.
But the tools are just that. They're just tools. They're just things that make it easier for you to get there.
So we're on the JavaScript Jabber podcast. How does Agile relate directly to JavaScript? Is it just that someone needs to make a pivotal tracker in JavaScript and then it relates to JavaScript, or what?
Well, my own personal take on the relationship of JavaScript and the need for Agile in JavaScript development kind of comes down to the whole, and maybe this doesn't necessarily apply as much if you're a Node developer and you're developing in Node, but if you're a browser developer, you're doing JavaScript in the browser. The whole point of doing JavaScript in the browser is because you're enhancing the user experience, right? If you weren't trying to enhance the user experience, it's probably quicker to build things using a server-side language than it is to build them using JavaScript. But what you're getting out of JavaScript is a better browser experience for your users. So that goes back to this whole working software, customer collaboration, responding to change. All those principles of Agile, that's what JavaScript is delivering to the industry. As a whole, JavaScript is bringing an enhanced user experience to the industry. It's quicker delivery over the web. And so Agile is JavaScript, I think, is a way to take those Agile principles and just keep applying them and keep iterating as an industry so that we're producing better software. So they don't directly relate, but the principles involved in doing JavaScript development, enhancing that user experience, is kind of what the Agile Manifesto is all about, is actually delivering software people want, not delivering software they don't want.
Yeah.
So you talked about how it applies a lot to the browser if you're doing UI stuff, because that's things that end users are using. I think it applies just as much to internal services or back-end services that maybe someone else in the company is consuming. We have lots of small teams that are working on different services, and our customers are the other people on the engineering team. Mm-hmm. So there's still, we still have to have communication with our customers. We have to iterate quickly and build stuff that they actually need, and still apply all those principles, even though our user base is a lot smaller and a lot more specific. They're probably a lot more understanding of technical problems, though. So there are some differences for sure. But I think it definitely applies when you're doing back-end server-side stuff as well.
Oh, of course it does. But I think what Joe's point is that with the browser thing, you are directly facing non-technical customers most of the time. And the other thing is the feedback loop can be so tight, because all you really have to do is make your change and then tell them to go load it in their browser again. And so you really get that quick iteration and fast customer feedback. And it's really easy to communicate it as well, because ultimately you can just show it. So that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything else we want to add before we start talking about methodologies?
I had a question, I guess. I don't know where this would fit in. But the whole idea of to do something right, you've got to write it 3 times. Uh-huh. Does that fit into this conversation at all?
If I have to write it 4 times, does that make me dumber than everybody else?
Yes, that means you got it righter, because you did it one more time.
We all knew you were special, Joe. So again, I keep jumping in. I have an opinion on all of these things. So one part of...
You might say you're really agile, able to jump in quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Joe will have an opinion on this too, because I'm going to talk about TDD. But basically, building it right the first time a lot of times does mean writing it and then rewriting it. So for example, TDD's mantra is red, green, refactor. And I know a lot of TDDists that do red, green, move on. And, ultimately, if you do the red, green refactor, and this is something that came up when we had Kent Beck on Ruby Rogues. He was talking about how code is meant to communicate with the next person that's going to have to come along and change your code or, make it do something else. And that's really where that comes in, is red, green refactor. So if you consider that your code is an interaction with developers in the future, even with yourself in the future, then Agile applies directly to it, because again, that's that first principle, individuals and interactions over tools and what was it, processes and tools. Right. And so your code is actually an interaction and not just with the machine. And so if you have to write it 3 or 4 times to get it right, then that's fine, as long as it's in that refactor phase. If you have to write it 3 or 4 times to make your customer happy with it, then you need to start looking at how you're interacting with your customer and how they're collaborating, because ultimately you should be able to get pretty close to what they want from what they're telling you. And if not, then again, that's when you come back, you review your process, and you see where you're going to go. But if you have to write it 3 or 4 times to make it work, I don't see a problem with that.
So I have a different take on what the statement, you have to write it 3 times to get it right. To me, that is applying to the iterative process of building software, which iterative development isn't unique to Agile. You can do an iterative waterfall process, just do a whole bunch of small waterfalls and still be doing iterative development and still improve your process.
Feels like you'd hit the rocks 3 times, though.
Yeah, exactly.
On the way down. Sorry.
But if you're iterating, seems like the projects that I've been at that worked the best are often the ones that didn't end up at all like the first version of the product that we showed to the customer was like. The customer's giving this feedback and saying, well, I want it to be this way. And then you change it. You put that initial version and they see it and they say, oh, I actually want it differently. So then you change it again. And then they start using it, and then they realize as they're using it, they really wanted it an entirely different way. And so that you write it 3 times to get it right statement, I think, really applies to Agile development or iterative development as a whole, because your iterations should actually cause you to write your software multiple times. I'm not I'm rarely surprised if I end up rewriting every line of code that I've written at some point, more than once.
That's fair enough, because you do learn lessons as you go.
Right.
In fact, another thing that's kind of interesting about that is, have any of you done a big, like the big rewrite, the major rewrite of your entire application on anything?
Sort of.
Everything.
So I've done that a few times, and have you ever noticed that you tend to do things maybe a little bit more intelligently and a little more quickly the second or third time? And I think that's another illustration of this point where, you figure out this kind of thing didn't really work last time, or, I had to work around it this way this time, so maybe I'll try it this way this time in order to make it go. And it's the same kind of thing where you iterate over in this case, your entire application.
So right. I think that idea of embracing the fact that you might have to redo stuff, or I think it's just acknowledging that you're fallible and you're not omnipotent and don't know everything. When you do stuff, of course, you're going to learn better ways to do it. And you might not know where the pain points will be until you try to do them. And so I think that's where the value in rewriting stuff comes from, because you've already done it once. You already know what sucks about it, so you can fix it.
Yep.
And I mean, if you can get away without having to rewrite it, then that's obviously better. But if you do need to rewrite it again, then of course it's going to be better because you learned stuff. And
right.
That's because you didn't know it already. So
absolutely.
Now I'm an Agile consultant. That'll be $10,000.
I know a few of those. Yeah, and it's funny too, because you meet some of these folks that are Agile, consultants. They go out and they help teams make the transition to Agile development. And it really, they're really usually very personable people. They explain things really well, and it's almost like they kind of have the Agile manifesto in the way that they approach the teams. And so, they're iterative and value the individuals on the team over the processes, and, all of the things that we're talking about, they apply it to the team. And I think it's really interesting to see that the Agile principles apply to much more than just software.
So you practice Agile parenting with your children?
Only before I lose my temper.
Then they'll call you the Scrum Master, and they'll have different connotations. Yeah. I think you like cracking the whip, standing over them.
I know a lot of companies that I've been at and seen, they practice Agile outside of their software department as well as inside of their software department.
Yeah, it kind of brings me to the Lean Startup. Eric Ries, are you guys familiar with his stuff at all?
I've heard about it. I haven't read it. I've heard people who have read it, so that doesn't really count.
So the principles are a lot the same, where basically you do a lot of customer development, make sure you understand what people want, and then you get a minimum viable product, which is just the minimum thing that you could possibly build that people will want to buy, and then you start that feedback. So then you start getting that information back from the customers about what they want, and you iteratively basically build what they want. And it's kind of an interesting approach, but yeah, you get these business practices that are effectively based on Agile development.
Yeah, that concept of minimum viable product is definitely one of those ones that should be a ready phrase in the mind of every Agile developer, getting that product out to the person as quickly as possible. From a software development standpoint, of course, that's what we focus on, but we want our businesses to have that same goal in mind, because if the business doesn't have that goal in mind, it definitely is harder for the engineering team to do that. I was at a recent company who spent, 3 years before they put their initial version in front of any external customer, and the initial deployment, of course, just went horrible. They had no idea what resolutions the customer is going to be using at, and they designed their whole entire application around high resolutions, and not realizing that their customers were going to be using a lot of small resolutions on really weak machines, because they'd never bothered to put it out in front of an external real user. The business didn't want to. It didn't want to expose those customers. They were worried, we only want to expose the polished product.
Yeah, but that's the approach that I took when I was I had some suspicions that I was diabetic. And so I avoided going to the doctor because I didn't want to know. Guess how many problems that solved? Because it's the same thing, right? We don't want to know that this is failing. No, you want to know it's failing right up front.
Yeah.
And a lot of the Agile stuff is based around that. That's why you're getting the customer involved from the beginning, is so that you can figure out that what you're building is the right thing, 2 days in instead of 2 months in, because It's expensive to pay developers for 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
You want to write the right code. It could be beautiful code, but if it doesn't do the right thing, it's useless.
Right. And that has nothing to do with what flavor of Agile you're following, or if you're following something you don't even think is a flavor of Agile. but still follows the same principles.
Yep, absolutely. So, what methodologies have you guys used? It sounds we mentioned Kanban and Scrum. Are there any others that you guys have tried? Or
Oh wow, is that how you pronounce it? I sounded like an idiot.
I've heard it
Every time I've said that
Kanban
word.
and Kanban, so I don't know.
Yeah, they're on the wiki article. I believe they have a pronunciation guide, and they say Kanban's okay, Kanban's okay, and I think they say Kanban is okay, but not Kanban. I can't remember. One of the two is not acceptable. 3 of the 4 are acceptable.
One of these things is not like the other.
Yeah.
That's funny.
It's my favorite song.
So I've only done Scrum, Kanban, and then just various flavors, personal flavors of those two.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat, though I have done basically Scrum that borrowed things from XP, like paired programming. XP is extreme programming for the unfamiliar.
Yeah, isn't XP just like a rumor? It's like a myth. I've never met anybody who's done XP.
Can you talk about the difference between XP and Agile? Because it's kind of fuzzy to me.
So extreme programming is
XP like Agile with swords?
Okay. Agile with swords. Yeah, there you go.
Extreme.
Yeah, and extreme programming is when you put poison at the end of the swords. But so basically, what you're asking in my mind is what's the difference between agile programming or agile development and agile methodologies? Because I think there's kind of a spectrum there. So the agile development or agile software development is basically an endeavor to follow these principles in order to write great software. Agile methodologies are a set of practices that are designed to make it easier to achieve the highest level of agile software development. And so you get a collection of things that you do that are supposed to make it so that you effectively are being more communicative, that you have the customer involved and things like that. And so they give you sometimes rigid practices to follow. So extreme programming, I don't know all of the tenets, but the one that a lot of people talk about is pair programming. But they also espouse TDD. They have some pretty rigid rules for getting your customer representative involved and what their role is. And, they have some pretty heavily defined roles that different people play in order to represent each of the different pieces that need to be in place in order for you to effectively benefit from the principles of agile software development.
So it's processes and tools and a plan to help you value individuals and interactions over processes and tools.
I know it sounds kind of backward, doesn't it?
Okay.
But effectively, yes. I think there has to be some level of organization, though. You can't be agile just by winging it. I think you have to have some idea of how you're going to implement and facilitate the different principles there. So, while it sounds kind of funny to say that you're going to have a plan, I think you need one.
Yeah. And XP was I believe, the very first flavor of Agile. Scrum came shortly after that, and XP, they were really trying at that point to really change the face of development. And a lot of the problems that were being encountered at that point that Agile was meant to solve were things that XP specifically tried to overcome, eschew, get rid of. So, very little documentation. A customer collaboration, they had these roles defined for the customers to be on board and be around the development team all the time. And they have very specific names. And when you go and you do estimations, they actually have this very prescribed, they call it the game. And the customers and the engineering team play this game in order to estimate all the pieces that are going to be built in the next sprint. And it's very, very prescribed. Scrum isn't really any different. If you look at the difference between Scrum and XP, besides the fact that you're not don't have to be doing paired programming, it's a lot of the same stuff. They just put different names on it.
Yeah, and sometimes the order or structure is a little bit different. But yeah, you're doing a lot of the same things. You just might be doing them at a different time or in a different place. But yeah, with Scrum, you have the Scrum Master, and I don't remember what the role is in XP, but yeah, it's basically the same thing. And you're doing a lot of it. I really do like a lot of the processes just because it opens things up and allows you to really kind of explore where you want to go. And there are a lot of people out there that will tell you that if you're not following every little thing that extreme programming prescribes, and you're not doing extreme programming. But ultimately, I think if you adopt extreme programming and then you take more of a measured approach to it, saying, okay, this is working, this isn't working, and start doing the, retroactively saying, okay, we're going to try and adapt it this way to see if this will work better for us, and eventually figuring out what works best for your team, I think you'll get more out of it than just doing straight vanilla, strict, extreme programming.
But it seems like the Scrum practitioners are more tolerant of that attitude.
Yes.
Again, like I said, I think XP practitioners are unicorns. I don't know if they exist at all, but it seems like Scrum.
And if they do, they stab you with their horn like unicorns.
They do, like unicorns do. But it seems like Scrum kind of developed as people saw what the way the XP worked and thought, boy, that seems a little extreme. No pun intended. And so, let's do something that is following most of the same things, but let's soften it up a little bit, make it easier for companies to adopt these practices. And so Scrum, I think I've seen in a lot of places the widespread feeling of practitioners is you're doing Agile, whether you're doing every exact thing that's involved, even in Scrum, you can still say, well, we're doing our version of Scrum. And a lot of the books will tell you that you should be changing the practice to fit your organization. So if one piece doesn't work, then do something different.
Yeah, the only other thing that I would add in here, and this is going to be a little bit controversial, but that is if you are setting things up so that you can, follow a methodology, whether it's Scrum or something like Scrum or XP or whatever, if you find, and I've seen this on teams, if you find that the adoption is working really well, the team is really gelling except for that one guy, then your problem may not be your process. Your problem may be that one guy, and it's okay to let him go, honestly.
Right.
Because having that level of collaboration and cooperation and having everybody on board is worth way more than even an expert in whatever field you're working in.
Absolutely.
And one other thing that I want to jump in and talk about is just, the people who are making the transition. Now, most of the people I see making the transition from something to Agile, they're transitioning from we don't have any idea what the heck we're doing and we don't really have a process to into Agile. I very rarely see anybody have a rigid waterfall methodology anymore that they're trying to follow and then realize, oh, gee, we should do Agile because it gives us these benefits.
Yeah, I think in this day and age, what most commonly happens is people are practicing a methodology that they don't really call a methodology, but it's what they do, and they actually have prescribed methods and things, practices that they follow, and they're really all very inspired by Agile because they've, they're developers, whatever, either just through reading or having been at places or doing a lot of the same things that Agile does, but they're not really doing a very easily recognized form of Agile. And so then they try to become a little bit more formal in an attempt to make their development go a little bit better.
Yeah, my experience has been both. I've also seen it where they have a lot of rigid policies around different things that are more reminiscent of waterfall, where you have these major change requests and these huge, big upfront designs that are being done behind closed doors that, kind of get dropped on the development team when they're ready. And so then they have a novel to go through and then implement. And, they realize that, they could get more from their developers if they adapted more of an Agile standpoint. But most of the time, it's more along the lines of what Joe explained. And, they're somewhere along that continuum of waterfall and Agile and, making that transition. But it's really, making the transition is hard. And what ultimately you have to do in order to make that transition is in my opinion, the only way I've seen it work is when the whole team adopts the whole methodology. And then from there, you can iterate from that starting point. But you have to adopt the entire methodology and do it for at least a month so that you have an idea of what is going on and where you're headed and what's going to work for you and what isn't. Because if you're not doing that, if you don't do it for at least a month, then you'll miss a lot of these things and you will run into resistance. And that month is just enough lead time to get over the resistance and really see the benefits of what you're trying to do. If you don't, then, you may find resistance on something that will ultimately benefit you once you get used to it.
Absolutely. A big failure point for companies adopting Agile is just the lack of a full commitment to it.
Yep.
So I just wanted to say one last thing. I made some disparaging remarks about XP. Those were joking. I've never really done it, so I can't have a real opinion about it. But I think the main idea behind Agile seems to me to be that there could be better ways to do stuff than we're doing. And it proposes some specific ways that they think are better, but just that idea that you can improve this process, I think that's really valuable. And I think that doesn't have to end with, okay, we did the things on the Agile Manifesto, so we're done, or we did the things on the XP list, so we've improved it and we're done. I think you can always find better stuff, and that means you'll find worse stuff too. If you try stuff and it doesn't work, at least you know now. So
some of the worst development I've seen was following a very easily recognizable Scrum process, but there was parts of the principles underneath it that they were missing. They weren't following the manifesto as much as they were following Scrum practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other thing is that in a lot of cases, my mind totally went blank.
You can be agile about your implementation of agile stuff, right? If you're valuing the results over the actual process of agile development, then you can be like meta agile, and I don't know. I think there's value in that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to jump in and say, is that you need to be doing your retrospectives, which is another meeting. But ultimately what it is you sit down and you talk about your process, and then you figure out the pieces that you want to, experiment with, or the pieces that don't seem to be working well. And so you say, okay, we're going to try this for this week. And then you go back and you have a retrospective on it and say, this worked well for us for this worked well for this, didn't work well for us, figure out why, see if there's a better way. And, ultimately doing that, having that practice is just really important for iteratively figuring out what works for you in your Agile practice and then moving ahead with it. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, I think a few of us need to wrap this up right around 11. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and get us into the picks. Joe, why don't you start us off with the picks this week?
Okay, cool. So because we're talking about Agile, I wanted to pick DHH's book, Rework. I thought that was a pretty good book and a lot of Agile principles involved in it. And on the same note, James Shore went through a Kickstarter project and put together this Let's Code TDD project that will be releasing sometime in July, where he's recording and screencasting himself just writing a project using TDD, but it's JavaScript. Uh-huh. So that's going to be very interesting. That's my second pick. And my third pick is a book called Resurrection, which is an Amazon ebook. I don't think it's available in print, but it's only a couple of bucks. A sci-fi novel. Very cool book. So if you're looking for a good sci-fi read and you have a good e-reader, Resurrection.
Awesome. AJ, what are your picks?
Microphone.
Mute button. Yeah, thank you. That's right. That was the mute button. My shave this morning. Best shave of my life. Uh-huh. So I got this Merkur double-edged razor. I might have even talked about this before one time. Did I? I don't know.
Nope.
Double-edged razor. That sounds like a sword in miniature.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, except not really at all. It's just like the old school kind of razor that your grandpa would have used or something. And I got this kit off of Amazon that has the razor and a brush and some shave soap, and then like 10 different brands of blades so that I could try them all and figure out like which one works best. And
so I have to ask, if it's something my grandfather would have used, is that something you strop on the leather before you use it?
Those are the single-edged ones usually.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's not the straight razor, it's the safety razor. Of course, the real men, they don't want to call it a safety razor, so they call it a double-edged razor.
A danger razor.
But the first time I used it, I cut myself up pretty good. And then I watched this video on YouTube of this guy in Vegas that's showing his brother or somebody how to shave. He's like, I promised you when you got here to Vegas, I was going to show you how to shave. It's like so. But he's got a good technique. And so I started doing that. And this morning was the first morning where I got like baby smooth, soft skin and no nicks. So I finally starting to master the skill of it. I love it.
I'll have to look at that because I bought a double-edged razor. It wasn't one of these fancy ones like you have. It was quite a bit cheaper, but I had a horrible experience. So maybe I'll try this and do it again.
Well, you gotta shave with the grain the first go. Like that's really important. You can't shave against the grain at all. So if like you've got one of those little curly patches where your hair swirls around, you just
I have like 100
kind of gotta
and each of my hairs like points in a different direction.
So I have that problem on my neck. I don't have it on my face so much, but on my neck I have that problem. but it's just you got to pay attention. You got to make sure that you go with the grain. And then on the second pass, then you can go kind of sideways. You never want to go against it because you don't need to go against it to get like baby soft. You just need to go like sideways, like a 45-degree angle from the grain. And you do that. Yeah. Watch the YouTube video.
Yeah, next time I see AJ, he's going to have a 4 o'clock shadow.
Well, if I'm not here next time, it's because I slit my throat on accident trying this. So
watch the video, then you'll be an expert.
The danger razor got me.
Dun, dun, dun. All right, Jameson, what are your picks?
All right, I'm going to go with 4 picks. The first one is XCOM Enemy Unknown. It's a really old strategy game. The old game is amazing too. It came out in 1993, but there's a remake that I saw some stuff at E3 about, and it looks so good. The original one was part of my childhood, and this one will be part of my adulthood. You basically build up this base with this army of guys, and then you send them out to fight aliens in little missions, and you develop really, or at least I develop relationships with the guys that I send out. You know, like I like them, and make up personalities for them, and then they all die, and you feel really bad because it's like Bubba, the farmer who you recruited, who got shot by an alien. It's not just some nameless goon that you're commanding. But that looks great. The next one is a website called 12factor.net, and it's all about how to build good service-oriented apps. So how to build great services, basically. We're doing a lot of services at ITV, and we're running into some of the pain points of doing it. So this has been a really good resource for us to improve stuff. I think it's by some people behind Heroku because they link to a lot of Heroku articles and talk about deploying to Heroku a little bit. It's not like how to deploy to Heroku. It's more general, but it looks like a great resource, and it's really helped us. And the next one is a website called nodemanual.org. If you've ever been frustrated by browsing the Node docs, this is another good solution. The thing I picked last week, Dash, it went to $30 instead of free, like as soon as I picked it. So I'm going to unpick that and pick nodemanual.org. It also has a bunch of tutorials on Node. So it's like docs plus guide to Node kind of. So it's been pretty sweet. And the last one is a good, just a good domain name service. iwantmyname.com. I've been doing stuff for a client that uses GoDaddy, and it's like being stabbed by like 1,000-foot-long sword. You just like keep getting stabbed forever. And then I bought some domains myself on I Want My Name, and it's been like getting little hugs from angels. It's so much better. So it's really simple, really cheap, not spammy, really easy to use. It's everything that GoDaddy is not. So
have you tried
picks.
name.com?
I have not tried name.com. No.
That's a really nice one too, very clean. And then of course Google's is nice, and they give you free privacy.
Wait, what? You can buy domains through Google?
Yeah, just they don't heavily advertise it, but if you just type in Google register domain, it is the first link, and yeah.
I don't know if I want them owning more of my digital life than they already do, though.
Yeah, they own like all of my digital life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll look into it.
Well, it's nice because you get Google Apps set up like from the get-go, so Gmail and all that. And then of course you don't have to use Google Sites. I'd recommend that you don't, because there's nothing you can do with it. Like there's no scripting capabilities or anything. It's just like static files, and they're not even files. Like you can't even access the files, so they're terrible.
Yeah, you're signing up for pain if you're signing up for Google Sites. My kids' charter school uses Google Sites for their website, and I've gotten pretty involved with the governing board for the school, and I keep complaining to them about the website, and they're like, "Yeah, we're planning on putting it on something else," and I'm just looking at them like, "Yeah, anything else, please."
But you don't have to go with that. I mean, I just want to make that clear. Like, I don't use Google Sites for any of the stuff, but I buy a lot of my domains through Google because it's cheap and they give you the privacy that most of the other ones charge like an extra $4 or $5 for.
Yeah, I've been I've used GoDaddy for a long time, and I finally am just totally fed up with them. And so I've actually been switching my stuff over to hover.com, and they're pretty cool. I actually need to get things worked out so that they offer some kind of domain concierge service to move the stuff over, and I just need to work things out with them to get it all moved out. So anyway, I'll put them in as one of my picks because I've been pretty happy with them. Their DNS.
Oh, they look nice.
Yeah, their DNS system on the back end is actually reasonable. So they have that going for them as well. Anyway, so one other thing, since we're talking about razors, I'll go ahead and put a pick in as well. For Father's Day, my wife got me an electric razor. I had an electric razor way back in the day when I was in college. Man, that's been like 8 years or something since I graduated, and it's been longer than that. but it was a really low quality one, and I didn't like the quality of the shave I got out of it or anything. So anyway, with this one, it's been pretty nice, and so now I just grab it in the morning and spend 2 seconds shaving my face, and I've been really happy with it. So I'll go ahead and put a link to that in the show notes as well. Yeah, I've had a lot of stuff going on lately, and I had a pick ready, and I've totally just lost track of what it was, so, because we're talking about all this other stuff, so maybe I'll pick it next week. But one thing I do want to do is thank everybody who replied to me on Twitter. I had a question about cross-domain scripting with JavaScript, and I looked at a few options, but I wanted to make sure that I hadn't missed any, and I got a whole slew of responses from people, and what I'm working on is I'm working on a course on building JSON APIs. And by course I mean a 2-hour online training. You can actually go and check it out at buildingjsonapis.com. The site is a little bit of a work in progress, but you can go and sign up there. So I recommend that you go do that, and just let me know if you have any feedback on the site or any of the material that I've put up there regarding what the course and what it's about. Other than that, yeah.
I had one other thing, a request of our viewers. If anybody has ever done anything with like tryruby.org or tryhaskell.org and knows how to manipulate that. I don't even know what his online screen name is anymore, but Eric Jacobs just bought tryjavascript.org. And he keeps on changing his Twitter account. He can't settle on a name he wants to stick with and brand. But anyway, so if you tweet at me, which is at CoolAge86, or jump on the Utah JavaScript mailing list, and you've got some ideas of what to put up on tryjavascript.org, we'd love to get something up other than my name, which is what he put on there right now.
Yeah, you can also tweet to at JSJabber, which is the Twitter account for the show, and we'll make sure that those get to the right place. All right. Well, that's it. We'll go ahead and end the show. We'll be on next week, and we'll see y'all then.